It wasn't the betrayal that broke me. No, that would have been too simple. People survive cheating, get divorced, start their lives over. What broke me was who did it. The person I would have called the most reliable. The person I trusted with my home, my family. The person I would have defended without hesitation. The one whose number was pinned in my favorites. If you gave me a list of everyone I know and said, point to the safest person, I would have chosen him. Not just chosen, he would have been my first answer. And when his name was spoken, my life didn't crack, it disappeared. In an instant, as if someone pulled the power cord and the whole world went dark. But to understand the scale of the destruction, you need to see what existed before. My paradise. My perfect American dream. I always believed that if a proper life existed anywhere, it was in places like our suburb. A cozy cul-de-sac where every neighbor knows each other's name. Perfect lawns, everyone competing to see whose is greener. School buses rolling slowly down the streets in the mornings. A Starbucks 10 minutes away where the baristas know your order. Warmth, order, predictability. It was our fortress. Or so I thought. I woke up earlier than everyone. Opened the blinds. Sunlight fell gently across the hardwood floor, as if a painter had chosen the angle on purpose. Started the coffee machine. While my Americano brewed, I looked out the window at neighbors walking their dogs. At the man who always came out in flip-flops, even in winter. At the woman who talked on the phone, waving her hand as if arguing with someone invisible. I liked it. I liked the predictability. I liked the rhythm. I liked the feeling that the day was starting the right way. And then she walked into the kitchen. Lauren always managed to appear as if she carried light with her. She'd come in barefoot, sleepy but beautiful, wearing my shirt or her favorite gray hoodie with Montauk on it. Her hair in a messy bun, her face without makeup, but so damn real. She would take my mug, sip the first sip, and say, "You made the coffee stronger again than Branson and Kelly's marriage." She loved teasing the neighbors, and I loved her for it. Sometimes I thought that if happiness had a shape, it would look like Lauren in the morning. The kids added chaos, but it was the right kind of chaos. Ethan, a burst of energy and endless questions. Molly, a little queen with her own rules, which only she knew. Arguments over breakfast, fights for the front seat, shouts of "Dad, where are my sneakers?" All of it filled the house with life. And every time I caught myself thinking, this is real. This is what makes life worth living. After I dropped them off at school, I drove to work. The route was short, familiar, through neighborhoods of identical houses. So identical that sometimes it felt like I lived inside an endless loop. But I liked it. Repetition is the best proof of stability. In the evenings, we gathered around a big wooden table. Lauren insisted we buy that exact one. Like in the movies. We had dinner together. No phones. That was our rule. We talked about our day, laughed, sometimes argued, but always found common ground. The kids told stories about school, Lauren about her students, I about work. It was perfect. No exaggeration. So perfect that sometimes I thought, if our family had a sound, it would be soft, like an old vinyl record. After dinner, we put the kids to bed, then sat on the couch, turned on a show, and shared one blanket. Lauren would wrap her arm around mine, and in that moment, I felt like the happiest person on earth. If you ask whether I ever thought it would all disappear one day, no. Not once. Not for a day. Not for a single second. I genuinely believed it was forever. Sometimes, sitting on the porch late at night, we drank wine and listened to someone's old lawnmower humming in the distance. Lauren talked about summer plans, a trip to Yellowstone, a family trail in the mountains, maybe a new pool in the backyard. I listened and smiled. I thought my life was moving along a perfectly smooth path, without bumps, without danger. That I had finally achieved what I wanted. I think it was this feeling of complete safety that made me miss the first shadows, the first signals, the first hints that my perfect picture was only a wrapper. But more on that later. If you want to understand why it hurt so much, why the betrayal was so destructive that it felt as if I were physically falling into a bottomless pit, you need to understand one thing. I trusted, endlessly, honestly, to the core. I never thought to question those I considered my pack. Never doubted the people I let into my heart. And it was from this very circle, the innermost, the most trusted, that the one came who destroyed everything. The person who sat in my kitchen, who ate grilled shrimp with me in the backyard, who helped me fix my pickup truck, who knew where we kept the whiskey stash, who received Christmas gifts from my kids, who called me brother. He was so close that I would never, under any circumstances, have seen him as a threat. And all this time, he stood behind my back, smiling, waiting for the moment. And if you think this is the climax, no, this is only the beginning. Because before darkness tears a life apart, there is always light. Blinding, beautiful, warm. The kind in which shadows cannot be seen. And I lived in that light for too long to understand that much of what felt eternal was temporary. Much of what looked sincere was an act. And many people I believed were mine turned out to be only guests. But what comes next is worse. Ahead are the first warning signs. The very point at which I could have stopped everything, if I hadn't been blinded by happiness. It often seems to me that destruction doesn't begin with a loud crash, but with a barely audible crack. With something small, something easy to dismiss. With a tiny deviation that seems meaningless, until it becomes part of a pattern. I heard the first crack on a completely ordinary Tuesday. Lauren had a habit that always calmed me. She would leave her phone on the kitchen counter, face down, but in plain sight. It was natural, familiar, as quintessentially American as keeping car keys in a wooden bowl by the door. We never hid our phones from each other. It wasn't even discussed. It was simply part of our marriage, like a shared calendar or weekend Costco runs. But that Tuesday, the phone was gone. I didn't notice at first, but in the evening it was in her back jeans pocket. And when it vibrated, Lauren flinched, not in fear, but as if she had been waiting for that exact moment. I smirked without thinking. "Who's texting you so much?" She smiled too quickly, too mechanically, and too far past me. For the first time, I felt something unpleasant move under my ribs, thin, cold, like the first ice on a lake. The second signal was even quieter, but far deeper. Lauren had always been engaged, attentive. If I talked about repairs, she asked about costs. If I mentioned neighbors, she laughed or shook her head. If we discussed plans, she took part, guided, suggested. And suddenly, she faded. Not physically, emotionally. We were sitting at dinner, I was talking about work, and she was looking somewhere past my shoulder, smiling out of sync, nodding when it made no sense, answering in short, clipped words, as if saving them. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't fatigue. It was absence. A field someone had quietly, patiently burned out. The third signal was too clear to miss. She said she would stay at school to prepare the stage for the play. I offered to pick her up later. She answered too fast. "Don't. I'll drive myself." The words were correct, but the tone was completely wrong. When she came home, her eyes were red. She said dust. Lots of dust from the props. But her voice trembled, not from allergies. She went to shower. I sat down with my laptop and opened the school website, just to check their schedule. It said, "Planning day, ends at 4 p.m. She left at 4:10, came home at 6:45. More than 2 hours were missing. Hours she didn't even think to explain. It was like seeing a scratch on glass. Almost invisible, but already ruining the clarity. And then came the morning that finally pulled me out of my comfort zone. Lauren was rushing, the kids were getting ready. I was making coffee, the usual chaos. Her phone was on the kitchen island again, like before, with sound on, screen up. It vibrated. The screen flashed for a split second, a few words I didn't catch. But I saw how Lauren turned around. Not naturally, not casually, sharply, as if someone had fired a gun. She grabbed the phone too quickly, clutched it in her hand, and said, "It's from school." But her eyes were darting, like someone searching for an excuse, not an explanation. I know my wife. Her voice changes when she lies. And now it changed. Friday brought the clearest signal yet. She left earlier than usual and said she needed to stop by Michael's for paint. But I knew for a fact she had bought paint recently, and plenty of it. After she left, I was taking out the trash, and among the receipts, I saw the one. Time of purchase, yesterday, 6:18 p.m. The same time she had been at school. And that was when, for the first time, I no longer had room for doubt. The puzzle began assembling, not into a picture, but into a suggestion. I sat at the kitchen counter, placed my hands on the surface, and just listened to the house. This house had always sounded cozy, warm, safe, but now its sound had changed, as if the foundation had cracked. I tried to be rational, an American habit, to explain everything, to find a logical, harmless explanation, to blame stress, school workload, the spring play. But logic broke against the walls of reality. The phone, the empty hours, A change in behavior. Red eyes. A receipt. A lie. A nervous reaction. These could no longer be coincidences. This was a sequence. And the scariest part wasn't that something was happening. It was that I no longer understood what was happening in my own home. To preserve a family, you need to feel it. And all I felt was fog. Thick. Cold. A fog that filled the space between us. I didn't want to suspect Lauren. It felt like a blow to myself, as if admitting I didn't deserve the life we had built. But the truth was already walking through the house. With quiet steps. Hidden between words, pauses, glances. And for the first time I realized, the moment a person begins to hide something, they stop living with you. They start living beside you, in a parallel reality. And I could feel that parallel more and more clearly. Its walls had already begun to rise. Soon I would learn who it was being built for. There are moments in life when you look at people and think you've figured everything out, that you've connected the dots, that a suspicion has turned into a fact. And I lived through exactly such a moment. The moment I first decided I knew who Lauren was cheating on me with. It began subtly, with the man who always seemed to be around her at school. The one who helped carry boxes, who stayed late after meetings, who somehow always knew what supplies she needed. I'd seen him a few times, and each time something about him sent a warning jolt through my chest. One day I came to pick up Molly a little early, and I saw them again. Lauren and that man, Dylan. She stood holding a folder under her arm while he showed her something on his phone. She leaned in to see the screen better. He moved a little closer. She brushed her hair away from her face. They both smiled. It wasn't flirting, nothing like that. But I could see some kind of internal dynamic working between them. Not romance, no, but attention, interest, an unusual lightness. A cold wave went through me. Then I started noticing him more often. Too often. Or maybe it just felt that way. But does it matter, once your heart has already chosen a suspect? When I drove Lauren to school, he was on the sidewalk saying something to her. When I picked up the kids, he walked out at almost the same time as she did. When they came out of PTA meetings, he helped her carry a box to the car. Small things, but small things that fit into a pattern. A pattern that clinched something inside me. I tried to think rationally. Told myself, he's just a coworker. Just coincidence. Just a couple of work days when their schedules happened to overlap more than usual. But the mind didn't listen. It sensed danger. It searched for confirmation. It assembled everything it could into one coherent picture. The first time I caught myself thinking, what if it's actually him? The thought didn't leave. It grew. And within a few days, I was almost certain. I did something I never would have done before. I drove to the school early and stayed in the car, watching, not to catch them, but to understand what was happening. A few minutes passed, and he walked out of the building. Not with Lauren, alone. I waited, watched the entrance, thought maybe she would walk out after him. But instead, another man approached him. Not a coworker. A man he reached for the way people reach for their own. They exchanged a few words, and then the man took his hand. Lightly, confidently, naturally. And Dylan smiled. The same smile that had shaken me at the school entrance. And then, the moment that shattered all my assumptions. They kissed. Calmly. Openly. Without a hint of embarrassment. I didn't need to guess, exaggerate, or interpret anything. It was obvious. It wasn't a secret affair. Not a clandestine meeting. It was a couple. A real one. And in that second, my entire version collapsed completely. The person I had mentally pinned everything on turned out to have nothing to do with any of it. I sat in the car, feeling like someone had knocked me back into reality. I was wrong. Painfully. Ridiculously. Completely. And the scariest part wasn't that I had suspected an innocent man. It was that I wanted so desperately to find the guilty one that I saw a romance where it didn't and couldn't exist. All the coincidences I treated as signs turned out to be nothing. All the worries, misplaced. All the conclusions, false. But the anxiety didn't fade. It didn't dissolve or scatter. Quite the opposite. It grew deeper, darker. Because if it wasn't him, then who? Someone else was in that shadow. Someone I hadn't even considered. Someone closer. Much closer. After the Dylan theory collapsed, I told myself I had to stop suspecting people. But that's like telling a forest to stop being a forest. Once doubt has sprouted in your mind, it will look for somewhere else to grow. And soon, it found a new target. Someone I would never have considered a threat. Thomas. You can live next to a person for years. Know how they take their coffee, which blanket they choose for movie nights, what gasoline they pour into their lawnmower. and still miss the moment when your inner world begins to warp. When familiar faces suddenly start to seem suspicious. When the gestures of friends begin to look different. I was sure my perception would return to normal after the situation with Dylan. That I would take a breath, exhale, and stop looking for someone to blame. But doubt is a weed. Once it takes root, it won't disappear. It will look for a new support. And one day I saw that the new support had become Thomas. The person I had known longer than anyone else in the neighborhood. The person who entered our house without knocking because he was part of our life. If you live in an American suburb, you know people like him. Thomas was that neighbor. The one who lends you a ladder, helps you assemble garage shelves, fixes the seal under your sink, brings your kids ice cream in the summer, sits with you on the porch in the evening with 2 beers. He was genuinely kind, hardworking, reliable, and, most importantly, always nearby. I had never seen him as a threat, not even slightly. He was the part of our life that never changed. But when your family starts acting strangely, you begin to see the world from a different angle. And from that angle, everything looks wrong. The first alarm rang one evening. Lauren said casually, "Tomorrow Thomas is going to help me with the decorations. The school needs a tool they don't have." I nodded. Nothing unusual. She often worked on decorations for plays and events. Thomas was the guy who could fix, build, or cut anything. But somewhere deep inside something trembled. And when I began to recall the last few weeks, the puzzle started forming. He was around when Lauren's car broke down. He helped unload plywood. He stopped by the school on days she stayed late. He suddenly began appearing more often in her stories. Too many coincidences for the mind not to begin constructing its cruel geometry. And then I saw them together. That day the school canceled one class, and I arrived early. I was walking across the parking lot when I heard laughter. Not loud, not the kind that tears through the air. Quiet, friendly, warm. And there, near his pickup truck, they stood. Lauren holding a roll of fabric, Thomas a wooden panel. They were discussing something, exchanging glances, laughing about a tiny defect in the panel that looked like a heart. I froze. He leaned in to adjust the edge of the fabric. She placed her hand on his elbow, quickly, like a clarifying gesture. It was a small moment. Almost nothing. But inside me it hit like someone had suddenly thrown a rock into a calm lake. Suddenly the threads I thought were random began connecting. His presence, her new reactions, their ease. Thomas noticed me and waved. "Hey, buddy, you're early." Lauren turned too, smiling, but in her smile there was 1 second, exactly 1 second, of strange hesitation. She hit it quickly, but I saw it, and my heart tightened. I drove home with the feeling that I was standing at the doorstep of a truth I was afraid to open. It felt like everything whispered, "He's around too often, too conveniently, too naturally." When the mind is wounded, it sees danger in details, and every detail starts to ache. That evening I tried to push the thoughts away. Told myself, he's just a friend. He's always been a friend. Stop looking for disaster where there is none. But I could no longer stop the inner engine. It ran on its own. The turning point came at an ordinary suburban barbecue. Saturday, a neighbor's backyard. The smell of grilled meat, plastic tables, men arguing about baseball, women discussing school, kids running around with water guns. Thomas was standing by the grill, and someone, laughing, said, "Come on, have you told everyone about Sandra yet?" I feel something twitch inside me. Sandra? The one from the PDA? Thomas blushes, takes a breath, and says, all right. Yes, we're dating. A couple of months now. Just keep it quiet, okay? She doesn't want attention." 3 men pat him on the shoulder. The women smile. Someone jokes, "Well, Thomas, get ready for the wedding." I feel the world around me change temperature. Lauren is standing nearby, talking to Mrs. Hudson, smiling as usual. No strange glances. No secrecy. No, this is about me. She is genuinely surprised when she hears Thomas is seeing someone. She even asks, "Really? Sandra? That's so sweet." And that's when everything finally collapsed. All my assumptions, trash. All my suspicions, wrong. All my internal conclusions, illusions. Thomas was a friend. Just a friend. And the man I had nearly labeled a threat turned out to be simply someone having a private romance of his own, completely unrelated to me or Lauren. When we got home, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, staring at the fridge covered with photos from our trips, school schedules, the kids' drawings. And for the first time during this whole period, I didn't feel jealousy or anger or fear. I felt like a fool. Because I had begun suspecting people who had nothing to do with it. Because I was chasing shadows instead of looking at the light. Because I was clinging to every little detail just to fill the emptiness Lauren had created in our marriage with her secrets. And that's when I understood. I'm looking in the wrong place. Completely the wrong place. If two obvious suspects turned out to be false, then the truth is hidden deeper. Much deeper. In a place I haven't dared to look yet. And that thought was scarier than any suspicion. After all my previous suspicions fell apart, I told myself I needed to calm down. That I needed to take a pause, breathe out, stop looking at my life through a magnifying glass. But the anxiety didn't know I was trying to stop it. It just kept growing. And the more I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that Lauren was just tired, that we were going through a rough patch, the more clearly I felt that the real reason was somewhere close. Very close. And that I still wasn't seeing the most important thing. Fear began to seep into my everyday life. I didn't notice when I stopped sleeping. Didn't notice when I started eating less and worse. Didn't notice that every morning began with a metallic taste of anxiety in my mouth. At work I started making mistakes, ridiculous ones, the kind I couldn't believe I had made. I sent the wrong file to a client, forgot about a meeting, and one day simply sat in front of the screen staring at a blank document, unable to type a single word. My manager called me into his office and asked if everything was all right. And I realized I couldn't answer honestly, because I myself didn't understand what was happening. I no longer controlled my thoughts, my feelings, or even my own voice. Stress was like rust that seeps into every crack, and one day it made its way to the steering wheel. I had to take the kids to practice. The most ordinary day, the simplest route. I was driving down a familiar street, and the same thoughts were circling in my head. The shadow in the house, the missing 2 hours, the phone she never let go of. I was trying to connect everything in my mind, but the more I tried, the more my eyes lost focus. I didn't see the stop sign. A car from the right hit my front fender, and I was spun across the road. The kids screamed, the other driver jumped out, shouting, asking if we were alive. And I sat there, unable to understand how it had happened. I had just vanished from reality for a few seconds. In that moment, I understood something terrifying. I was beginning to lose control of my own life. And if I didn't stop, I could destroy everything that was still intact. But I couldn't stop, because I didn't know how. That evening I sat in the kitchen. The house was quiet. The kids upstairs, Lauren downstairs. She said she needed to finish some materials. I thought I needed a distraction and opened the banking app, just to check the usual accounts, to feel some kind of order. But there was no order. By accident, purely by accident, I scrolled down and saw transfers I had never seen before. Small amounts. $40, $50. Sometimes a bit more. They were sent regularly, roughly every 10 to 14 days. And everything would have been fine, if not for the fact that these transfers had been deleted from the main list. Not hidden behind filters, not buried deep, deleted. So that I wouldn't notice them. So they wouldn't exist. So they would live a separate life. I stared at them like someone trying to decipher a sentence in an unfamiliar language. These transfers couldn't be gifts. Couldn't be school expenses. Couldn't be charity. They resembled nothing I knew about Lauren. This was a secret, recurring connection with someone whose name the system didn't display. I scrolled back months. The transfers went back to autumn. Before any strange glances. Before the hushed conversations. Before I even noticed anything was changing. This kind of secrecy wasn't accidental. It meant only one thing. She didn't want me to see it. And something inside me snapped. The next day, for the first time in a long while, I opened the garage camera app. Just to check. To make sure everything was normal. And I saw a notification from a week ago. Motion detected, Tuesday 2:14 p.m. At that time no one was home. Not me. Not Lauren. Not the kids. I opened the recording. The garage door began to rise. Not abruptly. Not like someone sneaking in. Smoothly. Confidently. The way someone opens it when they know exactly what they're doing. A few seconds later a shadow appeared in the frame. A man. Broad shoulders, steady stride, confident movement. He walked past the camera without lifting his head. Without looking around. Without hurrying. Like someone who felt at home in our garage. He didn't try to hide his face. The camera was simply angled so that only his torso was visible. But even the torso was too familiar. Not clearly. Not precisely. But enough to make something painful stir inside me. I rewound the footage again and again, trying to decide whether I was seeing what I thought I was seeing or whether my mind was trying to confirm a terrifying assumption. This man knew the house was empty, knew how to open the garage door, knew where the remote was kept. He entered calmly and left just as calmly. I checked the history. Similar entries had happened several more times over the past months. Always during the day. Always between school hours and the time I came home from work. Always the same walk. I sat on the garage floor, leaning against the washing machine, feeling the world change shape. As if someone suddenly turned off the lights and you realized you had been standing in a room with another door. A door you never noticed. A door someone had been walking through while you were living your normal life. I watched the footage and understood. This wasn't a thief. Not a neighbor. Not a random person. This was someone Lauren trusted more than me. Someone she gave access to. Someone she wasn't afraid to let into our home. And the scariest part, it was someone I knew as well. My life didn't begin to fall apart when I discovered the transfers, nor when I saw the shadow. It happened the moment I realized the circle of suspects was no longer outside. It was inside my circle of trust, inside my family, inside my life. And for the first time throughout all of this, I understood that the truth was close, standing right at the door. And soon I would see the one person I was most afraid to see. When I saw that shadow in the garage, when I realized someone was coming into my home who felt confident there, calm, as if he had every right to be there, something changed in me. Not even broke. More like shifted. As if the entire reality I had considered stable for years suddenly tilted at a strange angle, and I could no longer keep my balance. I began living like a man walking on thin ice, hearing cracks under every point of contact. Work, home, the people around me. All of it suddenly lost the clarity with which I once viewed life. I tried to hold myself together, but the harder I tried, the more I felt. Control is an illusion, and I was no longer holding on to it. That thought followed me every morning when I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks, who had become quieter, slower, sharper, who struggled to answer his children, who spoke fewer and fewer confident words. And untangling the mess inside was impossible. But one thing I felt very clearly. Now anything that could reveal the truth could happen anywhere. In any moment. In any phrase. In any conversation. And I heard the truth where I least expected it. Among grilled meat, plastic cups, and conversations about taxes. The Hudsons were celebrating an anniversary, and they hosted a big barbecue. A typical suburban American scene. Sports talk by the grill, neighbors carrying chairs, women discussing which teacher at school is too strict, whose kid joined the robotics club, whose lawn turned yellow again from the heat. Kids running around the backyard, jumping through the sprinkler, shouting and laughing. The Hudson's house buzzed like a hive, but I felt like an outsider in all that noise. Like everyone else had some inner stability I had forgotten long ago. I was holding a plastic plate with potato salad, pretending to listen to two neighbors talk about insurance rates. But in my head, I kept seeing that same image. A man in my garage, his stride steady, his movements calm, no rush at all. And the thought, he knew what he was doing. He knew where he was going. He knew exactly when no one would be home. And that repeating image hit harder than any nightmare. I tried to distract myself, but the thoughts came back. They circled like on a closed track. The more I tried to silence them, the louder everything from the past weeks replayed in my mind. Lauren, who had become someone else. The phone she no longer left on the counter. The money, small amounts, disappearing every 10 days. The shadow in the garage. My accident. My exhaustion. The puzzle was almost complete, but one piece was still missing, the name. I knew, the moment it appeared, everything would fall into place. And it appeared, so casually, as if someone accidentally dropped it out of a pocket, and only I heard the sound. I was standing by the long table where someone had just placed a big bowl of pasta, about to step away from the noise, when I heard a conversation behind me. An ordinary, meaningless conversation. One man said to another, "Well, he said he'll stop by and help Lauren next week. You know him, he's always in the loop." Said jokingly, lightly, a throwaway comment that could refer to anyone. But the next sentence made me freeze. Yeah, him, who else? And then a name followed. A name I'd heard thousands of times. A name so familiar it had become part of my background noise, like the hum of the air conditioner in summer, like the school bus bell in the morning. a name that would have meant nothing at any other moment. But now it hit so sharply it knocked the air out of my lungs. I stood completely still, feeling the blood drain from my face. At first I didn't believe it. Thought I'd misheard. The noise, the music, the laughter, anything could have distorted the words. But a second later the name came again, from another conversation near the drinks table, as if the world wanted to make absolutely sure I heard it. And then something inside me snapped. Slowly, coldly, I lifted my eyes and looked at Lauren across the yard. She was standing there, her head slightly tilted, laughing at something Mrs. Hudson had said. Her gestures were calm, easy, so natural that to anyone else, she looked like a relaxed woman enjoying good company. But I saw something different. I saw that she was too calm, too controlled, too unaware of me in that moment. And it was as if someone in my mind pressed a button. The puzzle began assembling itself instantly. The timing, the scent, the disappearances, the transfers, the footsteps in the garage, the shadow, her late returns, her new way of holding her phone, the way she avoided direct eye contact when I asked the most ordinary questions. All the strange details that never aligned before suddenly snapped into place. I understood why the silhouette's walk felt so familiar. Why I felt fear immediately, without knowing why. Why someone used the keys so confidently. Why the transfers were so small, too small to attract attention, but large enough to maintain regularity. The man in the garage could only be someone who knew our home from the inside. Someone who knew where the spare remote was. Who could appear when I wasn't there. Someone Lauren might trust with access. Someone who knew how to disappear at the right moments. Someone who always helped out as a friend. And the name spoken at the barbecue was the final missing piece. It was someone from my inner circle. Not a stranger. Not a coworker. Not a neighbor I barely greeted. It was someone I had defended. Someone I had trusted without a shadow of doubt. Someone with whom I had lived through not just years, but an entire era of my life. And I realized I had been looking at the truth the whole time, but not seeing it. Not because it was hidden, but because it was so close that I never even thought to search there. My chest grew heavy, as if someone had set a concrete block inside it. I felt emotions rising but refusing to surface. Not a scream, not tears, something deeper, quieter, a kind of mute defeat. I stood in my neighbor's backyard, surrounded by laughter, grilled meat, sunlight, and conversations, and something irreversible was happening inside me. I no longer doubted. I no longer looked for alternatives. I no longer tried to explain everything with logic. The truth stood before me, quiet, simple, ordinary. And now I knew the name. The one who had destroyed my life. The one I trusted. The one I welcomed through my doors. The one I could never, even in my imagination, picture beside my wife. And the worst part, there was no way to unsee it. No way to go back. No way to make things as they were. I stood there, among other people's conversations, and felt everything moving toward resolution. Toward the inevitable. Toward the confrontation I didn't want. But that had become only a matter of time. And I understood. Things had been bad for a long time. But now, everything had truly begun. When I got home after that barbecue, I sat in the car for a long time. Not because I couldn't move, but because I was afraid to step into a house that had suddenly become foreign. A home where I had felt safe 1,000 times now looked like a crime scene where I was the last to learn what had happened. I looked at our facade, the white shutters, the porch swing we bought together on Memorial Day, the small flag by the door, and I understood it had all become decoration long ago. A house of cards held up only by my blindness. And today the decorations were falling. I entered the house quietly, too quietly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile reality still hanging over us. Lauren was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, listening to a quiet podcast, living her usual life. She had no idea that a few hours earlier the world had collapsed, the very world I had been desperately trying to hold together. She turned to me, smiled, familiar, tired, homely, and I realized I would never again be able to look at that smile the way I once did. I stood in the doorway, unable to make myself take a step. She noticed. "Are you okay?" There was worry in her voice. Real worry, and that only made it worse. I didn't answer right away. The words pressed against my tongue, but wouldn't come out. A heaviness grew in my chest, thick like molten metal. But I had to say it. I had to speak the name. He was in our house. Simple. Without shouting. Without accusation. A fact. She froze. The knife hung in the air. The podcast kept murmuring about mindfulness, but the room had become a crypt. Who? She asked quietly. I said the name, softly, evenly, like a sentence, and everything changed. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. No, her reaction was worse. She closed her eyes. Not blinked, closed. Slowly, as if acknowledging the truth. As if this moment had been inevitable. As if she were tired of hiding it. That was all I needed. I didn't require a single word. Everything became clear. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, no. The heart aches. This was different. As if the very structure of my identity cracked. As if all the years of marriage turned to dust in my hands. How long? I asked. The voice didn't sound like mine. She stayed silent. How long? I repeated, sharper now. And then she whispered. I don't know how it all started. It was the most cowardly confession I could have heard. Not defensive, not apologetic, just tired. As if she wasn't fighting her actions. As if she had already accepted what she'd done. I felt a wave rising inside me. Not anger, but despair. So heavy it made my body flinch away from her. I wanted to scream. To break something. To step out of my own skin just to stop feeling this. But I stood still. Like someone seeing the aftermath of a tsunami after the water has already receded. He came in through the garage? She nodded. Quietly. Guiltily. As if it were an ordinary detail, not a betrayal. You gave him access? She nodded again. But this nod was different. As if she was ashamed, but relieved she no longer had to hide it. I sat down at the table. Because my legs could no longer hold me. So many years. So much trust. So many conversations. So many nights next to someone who secretly opened the door for another. Who let another man walk through our home as if it were his own. And worst of all, it was someone I considered part of my family. Part of my circle. Part of my world. I always joked he was practically a brother. She looked at me with eyes that, for the first time in a long while, held honesty. Not love. Not remorse. Not guilt. Honesty. And honesty was scarier than any lie. I'm sorry, she said. And that, I'm sorry, finished me completely. Because there was no fight in it. No attempt to save anything. No desire to explain. It was a goodbye. That quiet American goodbye, when people no longer shout. They simply acknowledge that everything is over. I stood up. Slowly. Because any sudden movement might break me entirely. I looked at her the way a person looks at something they once loved with all their heart. But that now belongs to another world. And I said only, okay, nothing more. Because nothing more was needed. The truth had already done its work. And I walked out of the kitchen, out of that conversation, out of that marriage as a different man than the one who walked in. Quiet. Broken. But for the first time, sober.